all here. Thank you for coming. I welcome you to the Seminary of the Southwest and to this 2014 Payne lecture. This lecture was established by the Board of Trustees at the time of Bishop Claude Payne's retirement to honor him and to focus on the topic of evangelism, mission, church growth, vision, vitality, all the things that Bishop Payne stands for. And I'm especially happy tonight that the lecturer is Jimmy Bartz, a close friend of Bishop Payne's and someone that Bishop Payne loves very, very much and who's mentored him. Bishop Payne and Barbara could not be here tonight because Barbara's not feeling well, which we're very sorry about. And I sent Bishop Payne the link so that he could watch this by live streaming. And I hope he is. So let's say good evening to Bishop Payne. So to introduce our lecturer for tonight, I'd like to call on Lee Thompson, our board member and the chair of the Payne Lecture Committee.
First, I am told that you are encouraged to tweet during tonight's lecture. #MySSW, so feel free to do that. I am Lee Thompson. I'm a member of the Seminary's Board of Trustees, and I'm this year's Payne Lecture Committee Chair, and consequently it's my honor to introduce this year's Payne Lecturer. I first became aware of Jimmy Bartz while I was a student here at the seminary, and Jimmy was serving as the campus minister at his alma mater, the University of Texas. On a Sunday early in my junior year, I attended church at All Saints as Jimmy preached. It was an early experience with a preaching style that was compelling and powerful and yet conversational, and I have not forgotten it. In addition to UT, Jimmy attended seminary at some school in Virginia, but returned to Austin just as quickly as he could. And since 2006, Jimmy has led THADS, an experimental Episcopal congregation, a mission station in Santa Monica, California. THAD self-describes as a movement of missionary people who've made the choice to leave the relative safety of the established church and take the love of Jesus to the streets, bringing transforming love into people's lives in positive, transformative, and practical ways. When he's not doing church, Jimmy is the spouse of Cindy and dad to Chaz and Jade. Jimmy also works with Red Bull's high performance program, adapting spiritual disciplines for athletes in order to enhance athletic performance. And at the trustees' reception that just ended, I watched Jimmy slam 4 Red Bulls, so I know that he is alert and ready for this lecture. Jimmy's talk tonight is entitled Fear, Risk, Courage, Failure, Intimacy, Change, Mission, and the Kingdom. Earlier this week, I viewed Jimmy's recent TED Talk on cultivating a courageous life. Jimmy believes in courage as a practice, maybe even a spiritual practice. We're blessed to have him with us tonight, so on behalf of the Board of Trustees, I present to you the Reverend Jimmy Bartz.
One of my parishioners and board members is a principal at the Innovation Lab at the University of Southern California, and they've just finished a 4-year study of Twitter. And they've found that the content on Twitter is like 70% chirpy and negative and cynical. So I might discourage you from, or I might encourage you just to embrace a more positive outlook and work at changing the content that's at Twitter. I'm delighted to be among you tonight. I'm back in a town where my son was born nearly 13 years ago, and I'm just down the street from the church where I was ordained priest. I'm equally delighted and honored to be asked to present the Payne Lecture because of my connection to Bishop Payne. I wouldn't be among you, at least in this capacity, if it were not for Bishop Payne's steady, direct, enthusiastic encouragement of me to pursue this privileged life that I and so many of us who are clergy lead. And he in partnership with the Spirit, really kind of launched my rocket, you know, and I'm grateful for that, that slow and steady encouragement. Sometimes I sit in my Santa Monica office, which is very different than most church offices. I occupy some space with my associate and a musician that's in the basement of a creative office space just adjacent a walking mall in Santa Monica. So the space is not sacred space, other than the fact of the people who come in and populate that office are sacred. So it's a different experience in a church office for me. I sit down there sort of racking my brain about how we can find new ways to conceive a new manner of church that might attract a new constituency of people. Oftentimes those things that I'm thinking of are counter to some of the traditions of our church. And I sometimes wonder if Bishop Payne thinks, God, like that boy who like showed so much promise is like really going off the deep end. And it is true that I am in deep. There's no doubt about that. But I remember that it was Bishop Payne's vision that this diocese and that this church and that this city and this country would become a community of miraculous expectation. And my work is a part of that vision. And I can assure you that it is some sort of strange miracle that I am doing what I am doing, and that I find myself happy and engaged and inspired and emboldened by this ministry in the setting and the context that I serve. So there I sit in that space that I could have never come close to have imagining, that gives me more energy and more passion and more creative vigor for sharing God's love to people than I ever could have conceived, even in the wildest parts of my imagination. And I have a pretty wild imagination. So I express both my gratitude and my awe for the work that we have before us and for Bishop Payne's leadership. Sometimes it's a lot to bear. Nearly always it's abundant and rich. It's a privilege, the highest privilege I know. You know, to serve in this capacity as a priest, even in a weird place like Santa Monica, is an amazing, amazing privilege. Los Angeles School District Superintendent John Dacey told the Aspen Institute this summer that Los Angeles is America, only sooner. So I come to you from the future to talk about fear, risk, courage, failure, intimacy, change, mission, and the kingdom of heaven that is at hand, that is now, that has come near to us. And I want to show you a YouTube video to get us rolling. It's short. It's 1 minute and 49 seconds. I've probably seen this video 100 times and it never gets old. So let's cue that video.
I'll be fine.
Have fun.
I'll do it. Well, here goes something, I guess. Oh, okay, you can do this. I'm gonna jump.
You got it.
Whoa, my ski's slipping off.
Just remember, never snowplow, okay?
No snow plows.
Just keep it straight and you'll be fine.
Okay.
Same thing you do on the 20.
Straight. Do you go faster on the in run?
Little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Is it any steeper, do you think? Not much?
Same steepness, it's just longer.
Well, just longer. Just longer. Just a bigger 20, that's all.
Yep. Have
It's a
fun.
bigger 20. Go ahead. You got this. I got it.
It's fine. You'll be fine.
Okay. Here
The longer you wait, you'll be more scared.
I go. just the suspense at the top at the first time freaks you out. That's the only thing. It's so fun. Huh? 60 seems like nothing now. Whoa!
60 seems like nothing now. I'm drawn to this particular video because of its raw emotion and then the swings that you get on the emotional spectrum too. In 1 minute and 49 seconds, this 6-year-old girl swings from legitimate fear, approaching terror, but not quite there. She swings from legitimate fear all the way over to elation in less than 2 minutes. It begs the question, can you have the one without the other? The book says the light shines in the darkness. And watching that video changes us a little bit. That's how courage works. It's contagious. It's catching. Someone in front of us faces her fear, and in some small or big way, we at least entertain the idea of doing the same in our own context, in our own way. Those are the mechanics of courage. And it's not too much of a leap to say, if the mechanics of courage, then also the mechanics of change. Courage is contagious. The courage of others inspires us to face our fear. Our fear is what creates stasis in our lives. Fear is what binds us. When we confront our fear, we confront that which has created stasis in our lives, then we have the opportunity to change. You get it? Is that self-help or biblical wisdom? It's both. It's both. The gospel demonstrates this reality time and time again. Jesus lived in this way well. The story says a leper came to him, begging on his knees, "If you want to, you can cleanse me." Deeply moved, Jesus put out his hand, touched him, and said, "I want to. Be clean." That's psychological courage, maybe with a little bit of physical courage too. Touching the unclean was a real risk to the soul and to the body, to the individual, culturally, and if culturally, then really. If experience is reality, then it's a real risk to Jesus. A couple of chapters later, then he went back in the meeting place where he found a man with a crippled hand. The Pharisees had their eyes on Jesus to see if he would help him, hoping to catch him in a Sabbath infraction. He said to the man, "Stand here where we can see you." And the rest is church history or NT 301. That's moral courage. Courage for the sake of the whole, the community, the corpus, the body. Jesus is pushing the whole here, pushing us toward change, pushing us toward the kingdom. We've got to learn our way out of our religious proclivities and affinities so that we become more articulate vessels of the boundaryless love of God. That's our pursuit. He says it too, Jesus does. "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good will to give you the kingdom. Courage, it's me. Don't be afraid." He tells us to face our fear too. He shows us and he tells us, though, in the interest of transparency, I'm not sure that the telling has ever really worked effectively in my life. It's the showing that I find compelling. When people say to me, "Jimmy, don't be afraid, you've got this," I'd prefer if you show it to me, just as Jesus shows it to us, or this 6-year-old girl shows it to us on a 40-foot ski jump. Like a soldier on the battlefield, like Tank Man in Tiananmen Square, like a woman who refuses to give up her seat on a bus, like a man who says, "Hi, I'm Bill, and I'm an alcoholic," like a couple who, in front of their community of family and friends, says, "I will." And just as an aside related to practice, we say, "I will," not "I do." We commit ourselves to a practice, not a condition. A practice of loving each other every day. So living as a Christian, as a Jesus follower, as a missionary is inherently risky. Risk is an element of the Christian life. And courage or fear-facing, or as Aquinas called it, fortitude, is a practice of virtue, of course, but a cardinal one, not a theological one, a practical one, a practice of the Christian life. Disciples, missionaries, cultivate a practice of courage. We have to, we must. It's a part of our work. Don't hear what I'm not saying. We don't have to in order to be loved by God. There is nothing you can do or not do, nothing you can say or not say to separate yourself from the love of God. But we're talking about mission, and our mission as Jesus followers is an active one. It's invigorative. It should be flourishing. We remember the wise words of Dallas Willard that orient us here. Grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. Showing is better than telling. At least it is now, or at least it is to me. So we work here, and we work hard, and our work is never done. The parameters of our work are simple, at least in the telling, to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our strength, with all our soul, with all our mind, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. The parameters are simple in the telling, but they ain't easy in the showing. So we work, and an element of that work, a primary constituent of that work, is risk, which makes it hard and scary and causes us not to do it. There's a tension here in the good life, in the God love life, in mission. If you don't feel that tension in your Christian life, collectively, individually, move toward more turbulent water. Do it. God is creative there in the windy, formless void. That's where the action is. That's where the showing is, and showing is better. At least it is to me. Now, this is more than just challenging, way more than just challenging, because what is God creating here in mission? What is God really up to? What's the work that God is doing? God is creating connectedness, relationship, community. It's more than just challenging. It's downright counter the culture. It's what we're up against and what challenges us. It's what we're afraid of and what we need. In the church, we've become myopic, and we worry about problems of the church, its decline, its relevance or its irrelevance, its voice, its structure, its law. In doing so, we lose sight that the culture has been fighting the same fight that the church is fighting now. The culture maybe sooner. The church always seems to follow closely or not so closely behind the mainstream culture. If you really think about church history, you can see that. But there's a problematic convergence that's happening in the culture that we missionaries need an awareness of. Maybe it's trickier today, but the narrative, our narrative, if we read it together, seems to indicate that it's just always been tricky. It's always been a challenge, whether it's Cain and his brother, or Esau and his, or Xerxes and his wife, or Paul and John Mark. There's just a tension there. It's always there. And today in the Western world, we're an independent cohort. That's just the way that we're wired, maybe especially in America. One of the founding principles of our culture, our country, is independence, individual independence. The culture eagerly embraces the individual over the unit, the couple, the family, the congregation, the neighborhood, the city, more so perhaps every day. If you want some commentary about this, check out Spike Jonze's Her. It's an amazing, critical commentary on individuation and disconnection. The church follows suit. The church is marched right behind the culture in that work of individuation. To state the reality in the church simplistically, it gets expressed in a private piety or a personal relationship with Jesus, or more widely, your God, my God. God becomes more Siri than Emmanuel. And again, don't hear what I'm not saying. You need to have a personal relationship, some sense of your God, who your God is. But your relationship with Jesus cannot be only personal. It's got to be corporate too. It must be. That's the work of mission. Facing our fear, practicing our courage in order to connect. Love God, love neighbor with more than just words. Showing is better than telling, at least it is to me. With our overemphasis of the individual comes atrophy of connection. This happens because of our hyper-focus on the individual over the corpus. As the culture moves away from character or virtue towards celebrity, we dig our mass grave even deeper. Legacy, hope, meaning comes to sit in that immediately gratifying here and now with the individual rather than in the present future with the community, the unit, the troop, the family, the church, the team. Our ability to connect authentically slowly atrophies, and that exacts a heavy toll on our lives. Connection, intimacy becomes frightening. As intimacy and connection decline, the capacity for human vulnerability recedes. As the capacity for vulnerability recedes, the capacity to engage risk, elemental to the Christian life and the practice of courage, an essential practice of the Christian life, atrophies. It just happens. We just can't risk it anymore. We can't do it. We just can't face it. We won't because we can't. That spiritual muscle has atrophied to the point of collapse or dysfunction or failure. We experience immutuality. When courage is forgotten or delayed or avoided, creativity plummets. We think about the cycle of courage. Fear and hope get together. Fear and hope have a baby. Her name is Courage. Courage bears 2 children, creativity and innovation. That's the cycle. Remember where the story tells us creation begins. In the chaos, in the tension, in the turbulence, in the risk. If you look carefully, the narrative never develops beyond the risk. It never matures out of it, which is good news. It's hard news, but it's good news for that. It's always there. Risk of death, even the subsequent risks of being born again and again and again. When our culture values personality above all else, how do we become born again and again and again? That's just too risky. It's too risky, unless it's not, unless it's everything. But you're in seminary, or you teach, or you're a part of a church, and you've got stuff to do. You've got sermons to preach, and papers to grade, and bishops to whom you must prove yourselves. You have an endowment to fund. Nonsense on the level that counts. Nonsense. Now you're talking productivity. And productivity is the harvest. And the harvest is already plentiful. It's the laborers who are few. The directive Jesus gives is not that we become individually more productive. The directive Jesus gives is toward fostering of and cultivation of connection. What does he say right after that? He says, ask the Lord of the harvest to send more laborers. For what? To love. To share the harvest. More laborers with whom we can connect. Risk is not the only element to the Christian life. Fear and hope. There's hope too. Intimacy, connection, relationship with the Lord of the harvest. He says, ask. Ask. Don't just sit there. Don't just do anything. Ask. There's both power and vulnerability there. There's power that's made perfect in weakness in our time, in the ask. Ask for what? Ask for more laborers, for more people to join you in the privilege of mission, for more people to join you in the co-creation and the proclamation of the boundaryless love of God. That work is hard. It's also outrageously rewarding. It's hard, but privileged. It's privileged beyond privilege. It is the deepest joy, the deepest privilege. Psychologist Tom Joyner shares a story in his book, Lonely at the Top, recounting the events of the Oakland Hills firestorm of 1991. This fire in Northern California killed 25 people, injured 150 people, destroyed 334 homes, 437 apartments and condominiums. Joyner tells of how people, when forced to flee their homes, in a matter of seconds, at the height of the fire, at the biggest point of the fire, a new house was igniting every 11 seconds. That's the level of catastrophe of this firestorm. At the height of the fire, as people are running for their lives, they saved each other and pets first. For those who had time to take things, they left jewelry and art and cash behind, and they took pictures. They took photographs of those they loved. This is an unsurprising human event in a moment of total chaos. The light shines in the darkness, says the book. But Joyner, of all people, knows. Joyner is a suicide scholar, and he's devoted his life to the study and prevention of suicide. He knows that we don't stay there, that we don't stay connected, that we isolate and we disconnect. He knows that we redirect our attention back toward the harvest rather than at the partnership we share with the laborer or the Lord of the harvest. He knows that the fear is there, that it's always there, always there. He quotes author David Kerp on the aftermath of the fire, and this is awesome. Kerp writes, just when the fire experience is encouraging you to detach from worldly possessions, purify your attentions, and all that, the realpolitik of your insurance policy rises up to inflame pride, greed, guilt, and every other unenlightened emotion you can think of. Just when we've established a connection with the laborers and the Lord of the harvest, we begin again to focus our attention toward the harvest, productivity, in order to ensure more for ourselves. It's just a part of the process. We know that. The super apostle says, I do the very thing I hate. The prophet says, what I want is what I've not got, and what I need is all around me. Failure is a part of the process. We fail to connect. What does it look like? Metaphorically, it looks like focusing upon the harvest rather than the connection, the laborer. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. True. But the darkness is still there. You know it is. We know it is. We're not stamping it out. What comes into being with him is life. And the life is the light of all people. Life comes into being. Life. Life, life, life. That's life, life. That's life. That's the kind of life that comes into being. The real treasure in that kind of life is in connection. But we don't seek after that. Nearly everything tells us not to. Ping, ping, ding, ding, zing, zing, ring, ring. You can do it all by yourself, especially with the 5S. Siri is so much more efficient than Emmanuel if your goal is productivity, the harvest. But our goal is connection with more laborers. That's the work of Emmanuel. Connection, mission. Now, because I'm an Episcopal priest, and I'm a part of a church that is called Thad's, not Saint Thad's or Saint Thaddeus's Episcopal Church, Episcopalians ask me questions about this and that. How do you X? Why do you Y? How do we Z? And the dialogue is beautiful. The conversation we have, the conversare, the seeing together is beautiful. The talking about it. It's the process of connection. The laborers connect in the dialogue. But a word of caution to us missionaries. If we search only for behavioral directives, if our search is devoted first and only to best practices in order to achieve the best possible outcomes for ourselves, we miss the pearl of great price, which is the truth that the kingdom of heaven is at hand when humanity is actively engaged in the mission of loving God and loving our neighbors as ourselves. If we're focused on behavioral directives first or best practices only, we're back at the harvest, trying to reap the harvest for ourselves. Or maybe we delude ourselves and we say that we're doing it for other people, but those are people who we know and love, who also likely promote our own best interest, affinity, or proclivity. We're back to productivity. Bling. Siri, how do I get more people to come to my church? Siri responds, I'm sorry, I'm unable to connect right now. Try again later. Let me speak to those of you who are seminarians now. When I was in your shoes, I never imagined I'd be living the life that I'm living. I grew up in a huge urban, suburban, Right One parish. It's about 150 miles southeast of here. And I find a lot of value in that community and communities like it. I love those churches. But in 1999, a bishop in our church, whose last name begins with P and rhymes with gain, invited me to a meeting, and he asked me to be prepared to reflect upon the question of, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the question of if you could do anything to attract a new constituency to the Episcopal Church, what would you do? And I took him seriously. And I didn't take him seriously because he was my bishop and he asked me to do it. I took him seriously because I loved him and respected him. I had and I still have a relationship of trust formed around a common mission, around the living Christ. I took him seriously because we were and we are connected, both laborers. He more advanced and wise than I, but nevertheless, we were connected in this common work. And I prayed and I thought, and I prayed and I thought, and I prayed and I thought, and I worried a little bit. I prayed and I thought. And I decided that I would go down there to 4th Street and I would get one of those old warehouses and I'd grab some musicians who could write some funky local music that people found inspiring and that we would eat together a lot, and that it would be crowded there, and that there would probably be a neon sign, a cross on top of it or inside that blinked, "Jesus loves." But if I've held on to anything from that vision, that experience, I've held on to the image that I have in my mind of the people in the room. I can see them as clearly today as I could see them 15 years ago when he posed that question to me. The people in the room, the people in the room, the people in the room. It didn't happen here in Austin as I expected it would. It didn't happen right away. I spent more time in one of those large urban suburban communities, not so dissimilar to the one that I grew up in. And I loved my time there. I loved it. It was so rich and so inspiring and so fulfilling. But if something has been driving me for the last 15 years, it's been ask the Lord of the harvest to send more laborers. How would you attract folks to our family? Folks who would never darken the door of our table or our front porch of one of our more traditional shops. How can we connect? Because we grow there. We grow in connection. We grow there because Emmanuel is God. That's how we understand God. And my work, my life has been scary and risky, and it's required courage, and I've got a few scars, but I lead the most privileged life. There are so many people in my life. There's so many people. I've been called out to bless them in their endeavors in our common mission of making a love-spreading difference in the world in the name of Jesus. What a wonderful job. It's my job. I get paid to do this. It's amazing. Some people will tell you that humanity's experienced more transformation living in the last 200 years than in the prior 20,000. That's probably true. Some people will tell you that the church is in the midst of major change and challenge, more so than ever and maybe in the last 500 years. Probably true too. But the kingdom of heaven is now. It's at hand. It has come near to you. So what are you going to do about all that change? What are you going to do about all the stress? What are you going to do about all the incredibly historic transformation that's taking place? You can just sit up there at the top of that jump. You can turn around. You can ski down the side of the hill. It's a metaphorical 40-foot jump we're facing in the church, and we are all at the top. Every single one of us. Says the 6-year-old girl, just the suspense at the top for the first time freaks you out. That's the only thing. It's so fun. 60 seems like nothing now. Over 2 million people have watched her GoPro video. God only knows what good she has inspired. Only God. What's your jump? What's it look like? Go and do likewise. I'm going to stop there. We've got time for questions and conversations. I'd love to hear what you have to say. It's really important to me. This is something that we do in my congregation every Sunday. We never have a teaching without some kind of dialogue in back of it, and it's the richest time. I guess there's maybe a microphone going around. What's up? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What do you need to say? I will wait you out like a good therapist.
Jimmy, why don't you? Why don't you talk about the first step? What was your first step in making the move from the traditional urban-suburban parish to that?
Yeah, so the question is like, what was the first step in my move from an urban suburban parish to the community at Fads? And I guess honestly, it was a lot of fretting. Like I spent a lot of time afraid and worrying. You know, I was a lot like that little girl up on top of the ski jump. You can hear, if you listen carefully, there is like legitimate like vibration in her voice. She is so afraid because she has that legitimate fear of risk or failure or injury, self-injury. And that was my concern, that like, wow, if I leave this profession that I've like been trained up for, and people seem to be kind of energized and jazzed about me being around it, like what's gonna happen? Like, am I just gonna be an outsider and cast aside and thought of as this, you know, sort of foolish renegade? And yeah, some of that happened. You know, some people think that about me, and you know, that honestly, it hurts a little bit, but I'm kind of getting used to it, getting a thicker skin.
Would you walk us through several days of your week? It sounds like a 24/7 job, but I don't know what the situation is. Is it mostly Sunday? Is it mostly Wednesday?
No. So the question is, will I walk you through the, you know, several days of my week? I mean, God, how much time do we have? You know, I mean, I have church on Sunday like a lot of traditional communities do. We have church at 10 o'clock on Sunday, and we get a couple hundred people that come into a room and worship together. And we got a bunch of kids that are part of a program that we call Feditas, and they engage in looking at the narrative and the same narrative that we look at in the bigger room with grown-ups and youth. And then I go home and I absolutely collapse. I mean, we rent space in a screenwriter's workshop in an art district in Santa Monica, and we probably always will. You know, we're pretty comfortable in a tent. So I'm there early, about 7:15, working with a constituency of people, setting up, and that's probably the richest, like, relational time in my week. It's really where I make like genuine friendship connections with people as we're stacking chairs and moving furniture and setting up sound equipment and stuff like that. I generally go home, you know, around 12 o'clock on Sunday, and I collapse. Typically my wife and I kind of like tag team each other with our kids for little naps, because, you know, I can stand up to a soccer stadium full of people and preach a sermon without a whole lot of anxiety, but I am an introvert, you know, naturally. So The subsequent talk and engagement of a couple hundred people at the end of the day is what kind of drains my batteries. But I have a 12-year-old son who has pretty significant special needs and a 8-year-old daughter who is lively and engaging and active. So I don't come home to a monastic cell. I come home to a son and a daughter and a wife and a 6-month-old yellow Labrador puppy named Rooster, after Rooster Andrews, an Episcopalian from this diocese. So Sunday's pretty busy, and I have an office. I have an associate that works for me. We have a couple of musicians and a part-time children's ed person, so we have typical staff meetings like any other place, although they're maybe a little bit more informal. You know, I don't dress like this on Sundays or during the week either. And I have regular pastoral calls that I make. I spend a lot of time with people. I spend a lot of time on developing content, and I'm kind of a strategist. So, you know, I close my door a lot and think and read. People are like, well, so what are you reading now? And I can literally only go back like 2 or 3 books because I'm just, whatever I'm reading, that's what I tell you. Like, I found this interesting. You know, I'm reading Thomas Joyner's, you know, Why People Die by Suicide, and Thomas Joyner's, you know, Lonely at the Top. You know, I just read Spark. If you hadn't read Spark and you're in training for ministry, you should read it. You know, it's about how exercise physiology engages the brain and the body and the psyche. I take Friday off, surf, do a little yoga, hang out, you know, running the Santa Monica Mountains. You know, it's a full life, you know, but it's an amazing privilege. Does that kind of give you some sense of, yeah?
So talk about taking risks with your family, your 2 children, and you know, any risk you take affects them too. And how do you navigate that?
Yeah, so the question is like, you know, taking risks in light of the fact that I have a family and stuff like that, and how do I navigate that? You know, the great thing is I have, like, my wife is like a true partner in this work that I've been about, and I think she's always known that I have, you know, an entrepreneurial, creative spirit about me. I can remember sitting in some vinyl chairs at LAX after a weekend of interviews and visits, and we were just kind of both sitting back, and her mom was taking care of our little baby at home. It was, you know, 6 months old, and Cindy looked over at me, and we hadn't talked about any of this stuff. She looked over at me, and she was like, so I guess we're moving to Los Angeles. I was like, I guess so. 12 years later, there we are. It is anxiety provoking though, but you know, I was just meeting with the board at the 1st of January, and we have about a little bit less than $500,000 budget, and we draw in about $100,000 in December. So it's always the fourth quarter, and like every entrepreneurial business, you know, you bring it in December and you push it back out on red in January. You know, you re-up. You know, that's just the way that it goes. I mean, we eat what we kill. And that's good. Like, that's better for me, probably. I like that sort of hunger moves me out of my chair. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Can you talk about a couple of events that characterize St. Thad's, or some of your favorite things? Like, I was surfing the website and saw pictures of the laundry project.
Yeah, that's a great. So the question is like, what kind of programs or stuff that we do, and an observation on our website that there was some photographs of laundry. In the last 5 or 6 months, we've adopted a program called Laundry Love. It's not our idea. It's just an idea that we borrowed from another community, and now the idea is kind of spreading around the United States. But we take over a laundromat on the last Monday night of the month in Venice Beach, and we do laundry. We pay for and help facilitate laundry for homeless people or people who are having financial strain or families that are displaced and under pressure. So last Monday night we did 600 loads of laundry in 3.5 hours. Yeah, it actually is like, here's the deal about Laundry Love. Let me just sell this program to those of you who are clergy and seminarians. It's like wonderful, like missional capitalism. So we went to a small business owner, a laundromat owner, and we said, what's your worst day? What's your worst day of the month? They said, it's always the last week because people run out of supplemental income support in the last week and are waiting for that check. We said, fine, we'd like permission to make your worst day your best day. Well, how are you going to do that? We're going to come in and do laundry for as many people as we possibly can in between 7 and 10:15 at night. So our constituency brings in about $600 worth of quarters into this laundromat's ecosystem. And by the way, like, don't be panicked by that number because, and this is straight from Bishop Payne. He sat me down really early on in my ministry, and I was worried about how to raise money for this and how to raise money for that. And he said, Jimmy, I want you to always remember this. I was like, what's that? He said, money follows mission. Money follows mission. And it's absolutely true. Laundry Love will fund itself overnight. Somebody at Thad set up a Amazon wedding registry, and like the UPS guy is like consistently like knocking on our door, and like our whole office smells like a laundromat now because people keep sending us like cases of Bounce and Arm & Hammer soap, and like we've had it. Our space has a dropped ceiling. So actually when you come down into the hallway and in the other offices, in our office, it smells like a laundromat. But we do laundry, you know, and you spend about 3.5 hours with this constituency of people who are either homeless or really down on their luck, and you help them with their laundry. They make themselves vulnerable in that way. It's, you know, you don't think about that, you know, about how vulnerable you make yourself when you invite somebody else in to help you with your laundry, with your bedding, that stuff that you sleep with. And so we have pretty deep conversations, and sometimes, you know, this is Venice, like, and it's like not like the like shishi like Venice. It's like Dogtown. Like, this is the place where, like, I mean, it's a rough spot. So there's a lot of folks that are intoxicated, should we say? And there's some mental illness there, and then there's just like some legitimate like collapse of support systems or failure of long-term connection and no backstop and no backdrop. And I'm there incognito. I don't run it. You know, there are two other volunteers in our congregation who lead the ministry and recruit the people, and I don't do anything. I mean, I help with the laundry and I hand out quarters and stuff, but people, you know, like, I keep it saying, like, quit like outing me as the pastor. Like, you know, like, I just want to be like one of you guys, you know. People come over, and like this guy Cliff came over to me and said, like, hey man, like, he kind of whispered, he's like, I know you're the pastor. And I was like, hey man, I'm just here doing laundry. He's like, I know, but I know you're the pastor, and look, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing here. And he's like, do you guys accept donations? And I was like, yeah, we accept donations. And he pulled $20 out of his pocket. You know, he's living on his bike and sleeping in a sleeping bag in the alleyway. It's amazing. Take it, do it, go. Do that in Austin. Do a Laundry Love. Do it now. Vote the seminary. The seminary should do a Laundry Love. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? I dare you. Do it. There's a need.
What's a 60 that doesn't seem like anything to you now?
Oh, what's a 60 that doesn't seem like anything to me? Red Bull. I don't drink caffeine. I'm not an extreme athlete. I mean, I am an athlete, but like when the swell comes up in the water, I get out of the water. I've never skied out of bounds. You know, I ski blue runs. So it's not a part of my context. But I had a parishioner who came to me who works at Red Bull and said, like, hey man, like I work in the like high performance department at Red Bull, and we're kind of asking questions about human potential and athletic performance and how that might. And I was thinking, man, you should come talk to these guys. And I was like, Kevin, I don't even drink caffeine. Like, I've never had a Red Bull. I don't watch the X Games. I don't have a desire to, you know, get towed into a wave or jump off a cliff or. But I've had an amazing experience connecting with these people who are like legitimately hungry for the essentials, the fundamentals of the gospel, but they don't have the narrative that supports it, or the technology that they use is different than the technology that we use, though it accesses the same thing. And on Monday after Easter, I got on an airplane, flew from LA to Santiago down to Balmaceda. I got picked up by like a Patagonian guide, driven 8 hours on a dirt highway. Somebody dropped me off to spend the night, picked me up the next day, drove me 2.5 hours in a Hilux pickup truck. We got out of the pickup truck, put our packs on, loaded our packs onto horses, forded across 2 glacier rivers, filled up pack rafts, put our packs in this like raging river, paddled across, hiked another 2.5 hours to spend time with 2 Navy SEALs and 4 Red Bull athletes talking about spirituality and physical stress and trauma. All the while there are like cameras and lights in this setting. You know, that's my 60. You know, that's... I spent 2.5 hours last Friday at Red Bull with these TRADET guys, the Naval Special Warfare trainers, and they have a desire to talk about character. It was in the news yesterday. If you see, the Defense Department head said, like, we've got to institute a higher moral code in our armed forces. And Andy Walsh, who runs Red Bull's High Performance, said, like, well, if we're going to talk about character, maybe we should call Jimmy Bartz. They're like, who's Jimmy Bartz? Like, he's this Episcopalian preacher. They're like, preacher? Like, and then one of the guys was like, hey man, like, I saw your website, and like the whole fad thing, like the disciple that nobody knows anything about, like, those are SEALs. That's like, that's our code. Like, that's who we want to be. That's the space that we want to occupy. And I was like, okay. And then, like, we talked about character. We talked about how you can develop that. How, they said, like, well, we want these guys to be able to flip a switch when they come back. When they come out of their deployments and back into their families, we want to be able to flip a switch. Can we do that? I said, sorry, no, you can't do that. What's happened is you've worked out a certain part of how people get along in life is a little overdeveloped. And ironically, it is the reverse of what we've been talking about tonight. So their problem is not disconnection. Their problem is they are too connected. So they work together at such a high level. If somebody is starting to stand out in the teams, they sit them down. They want no Peyton Mannings, no Tom Brady's. They want to function like a team. And that's what drew me, that's the interest that I had, was like, wow, like I'm reading and I'm seeing this connection. How can we get some of that into the culture? So these are like wildly, like physically and morally courageous people who lack a little bit of psychological courage. You know, they don't have that individual courage. So when somebody says to them, like, you know, you're a terrible husband, they believe it. And that might not be true. So that's my 60. A lot of learning there. We need to wrap this thing up.
Yeah, Jimmy is going to stay with us. We've got an after reception. Hope everybody will stay and visit some more. Can we please give our Payne lecturer a big hand?
Thank you, brother.
Instruction, or are we just going to open up?